We didn't know then that by the next morning, half the street would be burning, and that the same people I ran into the fire to save would later say I caused it. Oak Street was an old neighborhood near the edge of town. Small houses lined the road like worn teeth, faded paint patched fences, mailboxes leaning at odd angles. People lived there for decades, not because they wanted to, but because moving cost more than staying. I'd been there 12 years. My wife, Erin, and I bought the place after Dylan was born. It was all we could afford then, and by the time we could do better, we didn't have the strength to start over. Erin called it a temporary house when we moved in. She used to talk about bigger dreams, maybe somewhere with a yard big enough for a swing set, maybe a 2-car garage. But dreams have a way of getting smaller when life gets busy. Oak Street became our place, not because it was perfect, but because it held us together. I worked maintenance at the county hospital. Nothing glamorous, fixing pipes, replacing filters, keeping the power on. The kind of job that people forget exists until something breaks. Erin worked remotely for a dental office, setting appointments. Dylan was 13, quiet and observant. Sophie was 8, all energy and questions. Life wasn't easy, but it was steady. The neighbors were a mix, retirees, young families, a few loners. Larry and Carol, our next-door neighbors, had lived there longest. Larry was a retired firefighter, proud of it. He still wore the same department cap every day. Carol was the opposite, soft-spoken, polite, always tending to her garden. Larry liked to act like he was still in charge of the block. He'd tell people how to park, when to mow, even where to put trash cans. I tolerated it. Most people did. But there was always a sense that one wrong move could turn him against you. That wrong move happened a week before the fire. The tree between our houses had been pushing against our roof line. I trimmed it on a Saturday morning. Larry came over furious. He said I'd ruined the shade over his patio and that I had no respect for property lines. I told him the branches were damaging my roof. He didn't care. The argument ended with him walking off, muttering that some people don't belong on Oak Street. I shrugged it off, but Erin didn't. She said I should apologize, just to keep peace. I didn't. The following week passed like any other. Work, dinner, sleep, repeat. Friday night, Erin put Sophie to bed early. Dylan stayed up gaming. I went out to the porch to smoke. The air felt drier than usual. The smell of dust hung in the air, faint but strange. Around midnight, I woke up again. Something in the air didn't feel right. It wasn't the smell that woke me. It was a low, crackling sound. I got up, went outside, and saw an orange glow near Larry's front porch. At first, I thought it was just him burning leaves again. But then I heard the sharp snap, wood catching fire. Within seconds, the glow turned to flame, licking up the porch railings. The dry wind was feeding it fast. I yelled for Erin to get the kids and ran toward the house. Larry's front door was locked. I banged on it hard. No answer. I kicked it once, twice, until the frame splintered. The heat hit immediately. Smoke rolled through the hall like a living thing. Larry was inside near the kitchen, coughing, half conscious. I grabbed his arm and dragged him toward the door. He kept shouting something I couldn't make out. His wife Carol was in the back, trying to get the dog. I went back for her. The smoke was thick enough to burn my throat. I found her crouched by the back door, too disoriented to move. I pulled her out too. When we got outside, Erin was standing in the yard with the kids, crying. The fire had spread across Larry's roof and was reaching toward ours. I ran for the hose, but the water pressure was low. We'd been having line issues for weeks. I sprayed anyway, trying to keep the siding wet. Sirens came fast, but not fast enough. The wind was brutal. Sparks were landing on the dry grass, catching small fires across the yard. By the time the firefighters arrived, it was chaos. Larry's house was half gone, and ours was catching along the eaves. They ordered everyone back. The next hours blurred together. Water, noise, shouting. I remember Dylan holding my hand, his eyes wide but dry. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. By dawn, half the street was black. Larry's house was a skeleton. Ours was still standing, but the roof was damaged, half the interior soaked. The air smelled of wet ash and plastic. Erin and the kids went to her sister's place. I stayed behind trying to help where I could. The first wave of relief came from neighbors. They said I'd saved Larry and Carol. The firefighters nodded at me with respect. Someone even called me a hero. I didn't feel like one. I just did what anyone would have done. That was before the questions started. The investigators came around noon. They asked where I was when I saw the fire, how fast it spread, what I was doing that day. Normal stuff, I thought. I answered everything straight. Then one of them asked if I'd had any conflicts with Larry recently. I hesitated. Aaron gave me a look that said don't, but I told the truth. I mentioned the argument about the tree. The next morning, Larry was sitting on his porch, what was left of it, talking to one of the officers. He didn't look at me. Later that day, another investigator came by. They said they found evidence that the fire might have started near the property line. A few pieces of wood, a melted plastic can. They were checking for accelerants. I didn't understand why that mattered. I said I hadn't touched anything like that. The investigator wrote something down and left. 2 days later, I found out Larry told him he'd seen me outside late that night near the shed. He said I was doing something suspicious. The rumor spread fast. The same neighbors who'd thanked me stopped talking when I walked by. Someone posted online that the Ahero story didn't add up. Erin tried to ignore it, but I could tell it got to her. She started staying with her sister more often, said it was for the kids. I stayed in the half-burned house, fixing what I could, waiting for someone to believe me. The next few weeks felt longer than the years we'd lived there. I thought the investigation would clear things up quickly, that someone would look at the evidence and realize I had no reason to start a fire, especially one that nearly killed people I'd known for over a decade. Rumors travel faster than truth, and once a story sticks, it's nearly impossible to wash off. I kept working at the hospital. It was the only place where people didn't look at me like I was contagious, at least for a while. Then someone in the staff room mentioned Oak Street. The next day, the maintenance supervisor called me into his office and said it was best for the department if I took some unpaid time off while the things settled. It wasn't an accusation, just a polite way of saying I was a distraction. Erin didn't fight it. She said maybe it would help if I stayed out of sight for a bit. I understood what she meant. The police had been back twice. They asked more questions, this time about the shed behind our house. They said there were traces of fuel residue near the fence line. I told them I kept a gas can for the mower, that it was old and probably leaked. They nodded, wrote notes, thanked me for my time. But the way they looked at me, calm, practiced, told me they already had a story for me. Insurance agents came next, ours and Larry's. They inspected the damage, took photos, made calls. I overheard one of them saying that the fire originated close to the fence. He didn't say whose side, he didn't need to. A week after that, a reporter showed up. She was young, polite, said she was doing a community piece on the fire and wanted my side of things. I told her everything. How I saw the glow, how I broke down the door, how I pulled Larry and Carol out. She nodded a lot, took notes, thanked me. When the article came out 2 days later, the headline read, "Hero or Suspect? The man at the center of the Oak Street fire." The photo showed me standing outside what was left of the house, face half in shadow, smoke stains behind me. The caption said I was under investigation for potential negligence. It didn't say I hadn't been charged. No one reads that far. After that, things got worse. Larry stopped speaking to me completely. Carol would wave weakly from the car when she passed by, but never stopped. Other neighbors avoided eye contact. A few even crossed the street when I was outside. I told myself it didn't matter, that time would prove everything. But time only seemed to make people more sure I was guilty. Erin's sister started calling more often. She told Erin it wasn't good for the kids to stay around the mess, that they needed stability, normal routines, not police cars and whispers. Erin agreed. She said it was temporary, just until the investigation ended. But she took most of the clothes when she left. The silence that followed was heavier than the smoke had been. I filled the days by rebuilding. I replaced burned siding, scraped walls, repainted. There was something grounding in fixing things I could control. At night, I'd sit on the porch steps with a beer and watch the street that used to feel like home. Now, every light in every window felt like a pair of eyes. One afternoon, I saw a car I didn't recognize parked near Larry's place. 2 men inside, windows tinted. When I walked over, they drove off. Later, a detective called. They'd found a small burnt area near the shed, consistent with a spill. He asked if I used any chemicals recently. I said no. He asked if anyone else might have had access to my yard. I said anyone could have walked through. Half the fences on Oak Street were broken from the storm last year. He thanked me again and hung up. It felt like talking to someone who'd already written the ending. A few days later, I went to the grocery store. At the checkout, the clerk, a kid from down the street, scanned my stuff without looking at me. I heard two women whisper behind me, one of them saying something about a people who pretend to be heroes. I stopped going out after that unless I had to. Then came the letter. Official, thin, folded in thirds, the county fire investigation report. It said the cause was undetermined, but the point of origin was in proximity to the shared property boundary between 42 and 44 Oak Street. My address was 42, Larry's was 44. Technically, that meant no one was to blame, but everyone read it differently. Undetermined might as well have said unproven. Larry told anyone who would listen that he'd seen me near the fence right before the flames started. When the local paper printed that as a quote, it didn't matter that it wasn't true. It sounded like something that could be true. And in a town like ours, that's enough. I called the department, asked if I could give another statement. The investigator said they had everything they needed for now. The words "for now" stuck with me. Erin came back once that week, just to pick up a few things. She looked tired, not angry, just empty. She said Dylan was having trouble sleeping, that Sophie asked if we'd move away. She said maybe it was better if I stayed here until everything clears. I asked if she thought I did it. She didn't answer. She just looked down and said she didn't know what to think anymore. When she left, I stood in the doorway and realized I didn't even hear her car start. The street was that quiet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, every creak, every gust felt like something breaking. I got up, went outside, and sat on the porch until the sky turned gray. The burn smell was still there, faint but constant, like the fire had never really gone out. By the time the first rain came, I had stopped waiting for anyone to believe me. A few weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a lawyer. Not mine, but someone representing Larry and Carol. They were filing a civil claim against me for property damage. Not criminal, civil. That meant they didn't have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Just convince a few people that I'd been careless. The number they were suing for was more than I'd make in a year. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the papers, thinking how strange it was that words on a page could feel heavier than a collapsing roof. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Erin's mug was still on the counter, the one with the chipped handle. I kept expecting to hear her footsteps in the hallway. I'd started talking to myself. Not full conversations, just small muttered comments, as if the silence might swallow me if I didn't fill it. I called Erin that night. She didn't pick up. She texted back later, said she'd talk to me after the weekend. I stopped trying after that. The town's Facebook group became the real court. Every post about rebuilding or fire safety had my name in the comments. People speculated about why I'd been there so fast, how I knew where the fire started, whether I'd been experimenting with something in my shed. Theories multiplied faster than facts. I didn't defend myself online. What good would it do? Once people decide you're guilty, every word you say becomes proof that you're lying. Instead, I tried to focus on the physical world. The hospital called once, asked if I was ready to return, but then said they'd have to clear it with administration. That was 2 months ago. Money got tight fast. I sold my tools, some old furniture, even the generator. It wasn't pride, just trying to stay afloat. One evening, while I was replacing a broken porch step, a car slowed down in front of the house. The driver's window rolled down just enough for me to see Larry's face. He didn't say anything, didn't stop, just watched me for a few seconds before driving off. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was certainty, like he'd already decided I was the villain in his story. A week later, 2 officers showed up, not to arrest me, just to follow up. They said new information had come in. They asked again about the gas can. I told them the same thing. It leaked, it had been there for months. They asked if anyone could have taken it. I said maybe. I didn't lock the shed. Who would? When they left, one of them said something I couldn't stop thinking about. That sometimes fires don't start where they end. That night, I went out to the shed. Everything was as I'd left it. Mower, rake, shelves, but the floor was cleaner than it should have been, like someone had swept through recently. There were faint marks near the back wall. Scuffed wood. maybe boot prints. I took pictures on my phone, though I had no idea what I was looking for. A few days later, I drove to the fire station. I knew one of the guys from my hospital shifts, paramedics, firefighters, we often cross paths. His name was Sean. He met me behind the building, still in uniform, cigarette in hand. He said quietly that, off the record, the department believed the fire started on the fence line, but from Larry's side. But since Larry's shed had completely burned down, there wasn't enough left to prove anything. The insurance companies were arguing, trying to shift liability. He told me I should lay low, that when money's involved, everyone starts pointing fingers. That was the first time in weeks I felt a flicker of hope. If they suspected Larry's side, maybe it would come out eventually. Maybe this nightmare would end. But it didn't. 2 days later, I got served another notice, this time from the insurance company saying they were reserving their rights due to a potential negligence. That's legal speak for we might refuse to pay. By now, Erin had stopped answering altogether. I went to her sister's house once, stood outside in the rain, and saw my kids watching from the window. They didn't wave. Erin came to the door, said it wasn't a good time. She looked nervous. Not scared, but uncomfortable, like she was talking to a stranger. That's when I realized how fast a person can lose everything, even when they do the right thing. A few days later, I was sitting on the porch when the mail truck stopped. The driver, an older man I'd known for years, didn't meet my eyes. He handed me a stack of letters, bills, mostly, and at the bottom, a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a note written in block letters. You should have left them. Everyone would have been better off. I don't know who sent it. Maybe no one from the street. Maybe someone just wanted to remind me that in their minds, I was the reason anyone got hurt. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat by the window, watching the empty street lights flicker. A wind came through, and for a second I could swear I smelled smoke. Not real, maybe just memory. I started thinking about the fire again. The way it spread, the direction the flames moved. Something about it didn't fit the story everyone believed. If it had started on my side, it would have spread toward Larry's, not inward. But the photos showed burn patterns that curved the other way, like it had blown in from his side, not toward it. I pulled out the investigation report again, highlighted sections, compared timestamps. It wasn't proof, but it made sense. Someone on Larry's side must have been burning something, maybe trash, maybe tools, and it got out of control. But by the time anyone saw, the flames were already too big, and when I ran in to help, I became the easiest explanation. The next morning, I went to see Sean again. He listened, nodded slowly, said he couldn't officially reopen anything, but that he'd ask around. He looked tired, like he'd already seen too many good people ground down by small-town politics. That night when I got home, there was a note taped to my door. It said, "Stop digging. Fires burn both ways." The note on my door stayed there for a few hours before I took it down. I didn't throw it away. I pinned it to the wall, above my desk, right next to the printed investigation summary. Not as some dramatic gesture, but because it reminded me of what I was up against. Whoever sent it wanted me quiet. That meant I was close to something. The next morning, I drove to the fire station again. Sean wasn't on shift, but another firefighter, a guy named Travis, recognized me. He said quietly that I should probably stop showing up. People were starting to talk. That phrase had become the soundtrack of my life. People are talking. I went home, opened my laptop, and started digging through public records. Most of the town's building permits, inspection reports, and property insurance filings were online. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found a document that made me stop. A claim filed by Larry's insurance company 2 days before the fire. It was listed as a pending property hazard adjustment. It didn't prove anything, but it painted a picture. Larry's shed had already been a risk. Maybe he'd been warned about it. Maybe he'd tried to fix it himself and made it worse. I kept reading. The next entry was a note from an adjuster. Inspection delayed due to property access issue. It was dated 1 day before the fire. That was when something clicked. If Larry had known his shed might fail an inspection, a fire, accidental or not, could wipe away that liability. And if it spread to my side, he could say it started there. Insurance would cover the losses and he'd walk away clean. But I had no proof. Just a chain of thoughts that no one would take seriously from a man half the town already hated. The next day, a woman came to my door. She introduced herself as Janet. She worked for the insurance company, a field investigator. She said she needed to take a few follow-up photos. I watched her walk the property, taking careful, deliberate pictures. When she was done, she hesitated before leaving and said quietly that she wasn't supposed to talk about open cases. But off the record, she'd seen enough fires to know when a story didn't line up. That small sentence kept me going for weeks. I started helping her in small ways, legally. She couldn't use anything I gave her officially, but she hinted that if I kept track of inconsistencies, she could nudge things internally. So I documented everything. Burn marks, timeline of events, every time Larry came near the property afterward. It wasn't revenge, it was survival. Meanwhile, the lawsuit moved forward. My lawyer, a tired man named Dale who charged by the hour, told me bluntly that even if I won, I'd still lose money. Legal fees alone would ruin me. He asked if I'd consider settling. I said no. I wasn't paying for something I didn't do. At night, the neighborhood was different. Half the houses were rebuilt, half still boarded up. The smell of burnt wood had faded, replaced by fresh paint and new fences. But no one waved anymore. Conversations stopped when I walked by. One evening, as I took out the trash, I saw Larry standing by his mailbox. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched me again, that same calm certainty. Then he smiled, not cruelly, just knowingly, like someone who'd already won. 2 days later, Janet called. Her tone was different this time, careful, measured. She said she'd found something in the claim records. Apparently, Larry had filed 2 separate insurance claims, one for property loss, one for personal injury, and the timestamps didn't match the timeline of the fire report. His first claim had been logged while the fire was still burning. That shouldn't have been possible. She couldn't share documents officially, but she told me enough to understand what it meant. He prepared the paperwork in advance. He hadn't predicted the fire, he'd planned for it. I drove to her office the next day, brought her coffee, and thanked her. She said I needed to be careful, that if she pushed this too far without solid evidence, it could backfire on both of us. Still, I could see in her eyes that she believed me. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. But good days didn't last long. The next week, someone slashed the tires on my truck. No note, no witnesses, just 4 flat tires in silence. I reported it to the police. They nodded, filled out a report, and said there wasn't much they could do. One of them, a younger officer, almost smiled when he said it. That was when I realized even some of them thought I deserved it. I started keeping to myself. Walks at dawn, grocery runs, after dark. The isolation stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like protection. Janet called again a few days later. She'd gotten access to internal memos between Larry's adjuster and the insurance regional office. The adjuster had flagged the fire as a potentially intentional. That phrase opened the door. If it became official, the entire investigation would shift. Then she told me something that made my hands go cold. Larry had recently taken out a second policy on his shed, a short-term coverage plan, 3 days before the fire. It was almost impossible to explain as coincidence. That was the missing piece. If I could get that information into court, everything would change. But Janet said she couldn't share internal data without a subpoena. My lawyer said subpoenas cost money, more money than I had. So I went to the courthouse myself, filed a motion pro se, on my own without an attorney. The clerk looked at me like I was crazy, but she stamped it anyway. It was the first thing I'd done in months that felt like fighting back. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table, I heard a knock. Not loud, just steady. When I opened the door, there was no one there. Only another note tucked under a rock on the step. Stop trying to be the hero again. I couldn't sleep that night either. The next few days blurred together. Between the court paperwork, the constant low hum of anxiety, and the stares I got in town, I barely noticed how much time passed. Then one afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar in a way that made me sit down. It was Sean, the firefighter who'd been on duty the night of the fire. He said he couldn't talk long, but that he'd seen my motion filing come through the courthouse system. "You're not crazy," he said. "And you're not wrong about Larry." Before I could ask what he meant, he hung up. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the call. Sean wasn't the type to get involved in anything political. He'd always followed protocol. If he was reaching out to me, something had to be bothering him. 2 days later, a small envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, no message, just a single printed photo inside. It looked like a scene report, probably from the fire department's internal files. I recognized the street layout immediately. Oak Street, the night of the fire. But the mark that showed the point of origin wasn't behind my house, as the official report had claimed. It was on the opposite side for Glory's shed. Someone had redrawn the boundary lines. The document had been altered. The first version must have been changed before submission. And whoever sent me this wanted me to know. It took everything I had not to drive straight to Larry's house that night. Instead, I scanned the photo and sent a copy to Janet. She replied just 10 minutes later. I've seen this before. I think we can use it. That was the first time anyone had said we. A few weeks later, Janet arranged a meeting with a man named Russell, a retired fire investigator who'd worked for the county for 30 years. He'd heard about my case through mutual contacts and agreed to take a look. He brought a small binder full of photographs, chemical reports, and heat pattern diagrams. He studied my copies for a few minutes, then leaned back in his chair. He said the burn pattern on the official report didn't match what he saw in the photos. The angles of heat damage suggested the flames had moved toward my house, not away from it. That meant the fire had started on Larry's side, period. He said quietly that the only way the official report could be that wrong was if someone had deliberately changed it, and he suspected who. The county fire marshal who'd signed the report had been under pressure to close several cases fast that quarter. Your fire was convenient, Russell said. It gave them a quick resolution. He offered to write an expert statement for court. I didn't even know what to say. I just nodded and thanked him. When I got back to my truck, I sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard. For the first time in months, something inside me loosened. I wasn't crazy. And maybe, just maybe, I was going to prove it. By late spring, the court finally set a date for the next hearing. The town had started to warm up again. Kids were biking past the rebuilt homes. Lawnmowers hummed in the distance. And for a few brief moments, things almost felt normal. But the closer the date got, the more uneasy I became. I started noticing small things. The same white pickup parked across the street. The same stranger at the grocery store, pretending to browse while watching me. It could have been paranoia, but after the notes and the slashed tires, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone didn't want me to show up in court. Then 3 days before the hearing, Sean called again. He said he needed to meet. We met at a diner outside town, the kind of place with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tasted like old metal. He looked tired, nervous. He told me he tried to talk to his captain about the discrepancies in the report and was told to drop it. Apparently, the department had been pressured by city officials to support the narrative. Any attempt to change the cause of the fire would reopen too many cases, cost too much money, and, as his captain put it, damage public trust. Sean slid a flash drive across the table. I didn't see this, he said before standing up and walking out. I plugged it into my laptop that night. It contained video footage, helmet camera recordings from that night. The timestamp was before the fire department had even arrived on my property. The footage showed Larry's shed already engulfed, the flames spreading outward. Not from my yard, but toward it. In the background, a faint voice yelled something about the generator. I replayed it over and over. Larry had been using a gas generator that week, one he'd borrowed from a construction site. If it malfunctioned, that could have started the fire, and he'd known that. Now I had proof. Janet helped me file the evidence through her legal department, attaching Russell's expert statement and the timestamp footage. The court accepted it as supplemental material. The judge ordered a temporary hold on Larry's claim and an internal audit of the investigation process. When the news broke, it spread fast. People who hadn't looked me in the eye for months suddenly wanted to talk. Some apologized, some avoided me even more. But it didn't matter. For once, the story wasn't completely one-sided. Larry didn't say a word to me. His house stayed quiet, his blinds always closed. But one morning I saw a for sale sign planted in his yard. The hearing came and went. My lawyer barely had to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself. The judge dismissed all claims against me and recommended the fire department reopen the case. As I walked out of the courthouse, Janet caught up to me. She said she'd be moving to another office soon. Promotion. I thanked her, told her I couldn't have done any of this without her. She smiled and said that some things are just about setting records straight. For the first time in almost a year, I felt air fill my lungs without that constant pressure in my chest. But even then, I didn't feel victorious, just tired. That night, when I came home, I stood in my backyard. What was left of it? The fence was new, the grass had started to grow back, and the house smelled like fresh paint. I thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the anger, the silence, and then I saw it. Across the street, the old oak tree that had half burned during the fire was growing new leaves. Green ones. It sounds small, but in that moment, it felt like the town was finally starting to heal. Maybe I was too. The first week after the fire was a blur of sirens, insurance calls, and sleepless nights. I spent most mornings outside, sweeping the ashes off my driveway, even though the wind kept bringing more. The smell of burned wood stuck to everything. My clothes, my hands, even my coffee. It felt like the fire didn't end that night. It just changed shape. The police came again for follow-up questions. They said it was a routine. I could tell they didn't trust me. One of them, a younger guy, kept asking about the gas lines, if I'd ever done any repair work there. I told him no, that I'd never touched them. But every time I answered, he wrote something down without looking up. It made me feel like every word was being twisted before it hit the page. The neighborhood had turned quiet. The sound of hammers and drills had become background noise, but for me, the loudest sound was silence, the kind that follows you inside and makes every thought echo twice. The lawsuit was still hanging over us. We couldn't afford to fight it properly, and the insurance company kept sending letters with long words that all meant the same thing: blame. Every envelope looked heavier than the last. I tried to keep busy. Watched some of the neighbors rebuild, volunteered at the fire relief center downtown. Nobody said it out loud, but people avoided letting me near anything electrical. They handed me tools, nails, boards, but never wires or gas fittings. That quiet distrust hurt more than anything said to my face. Then one afternoon, I ran into an old friend, Mark, who worked part-time with the county inspection office. We hadn't seen each other in months. He looked uncomfortable when he spotted me, probably because of everything that had been said online. But after a few minutes of small talk, he lowered his voice and asked if I ever saw the official fire report. I told him no. They said it was sealed for review. He hesitated, looked around, then said something that stuck with me. He said that during the inspection, one of the investigators mentioned finding corrosion in the gas line near the Carson side of the property. It had been patched years ago by a contractor. Not city work, just a private fix. The same spot where the fire started. When I asked why it wasn't in the report, Mark shrugged. Said the insurance company didn't like uncertain causes. It made it harder for them to process claims. So they'd labeled it human error. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table staring at a cup of cold coffee, trying to decide what to do. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the truth on record, something that showed I hadn't started the fire that destroyed half our street. The next day, I went to the city office. They said the report was still pending. I filed a request to view any public record related to the Oak Street incident. The clerk behind the counter looked at me like she already knew who I was. She told me it could take weeks. I thanked her anyway and left, but before I reached the door, she said quietly that if I came back near closing, the senior clerk might lose track of a few papers. I did exactly that. At 4:57 p.m., she slipped me a copy of a maintenance log from 5 years earlier. It showed a private gas contractor had done emergency work on the Carson property after a small leak, the same area where the fire began. The note at the bottom said a temporary fix, recommend full replacement. There was no follow-up entry after that. I stood in the parking lot holding that paper like it was something alive. It didn't erase everything. The pain, the rumors, the losses, but it was the first real piece of truth I'd held in months. When I showed it to Melissa, she didn't say a word at first. Then she just sat down and cried. And not from sadness, maybe from relief. Jake read it over twice, said it wasn't fair that something like this could be buried for so long. He offered to help me write a statement and send copies to both the insurance company and the police department. I didn't expect much to happen. People don't like reopening closed stories, especially ones that made the news. But 2 weeks later, I got a call from a local reporter who'd covered the fire. She said someone had leaked the maintenance record and wanted to confirm it was real. I said yes, and for the first time I didn't feel scared saying my name out loud. The story went public 3 days later. The headline wasn't dramatic. Just a negligence, not neighbor. New evidence suggests faulty gas line caused Oak Street fire. It didn't trend for long. It wasn't the kind of story people shared, but it was enough. The Carsons didn't reach out. They didn't apologize. They didn't have. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, just done. A month later, the lawsuit was officially dropped. The lawyer called it a mutual resolution. I called it freedom. Still, something in me couldn't let go of the idea that everyone had been so quick to believe the worst. Maybe it's easier to blame a person than a system. Easier to say we did it than admit that sometimes things break quietly over years until they catch fire. New walls, new paint, same footprint. I stopped at the edge of their yard and looked at where the fire had started. For the first time, I didn't feel sick looking at it, just tired. I realized then that maybe the point wasn't clearing my name. It was learning to live again without waiting for another disaster. That night when I came home, Melissa had left dinner warming on the stove. Jake was in the garage fixing something. It was just a normal evening. No fear, no whispers, no smoke in the air. And for the first time since that night, I believed normal could be enough. After the lawsuit ended, the world didn't suddenly feel lighter. It's strange how relief doesn't come all at once. It seeps in slowly, like daylight through a closed curtain. For weeks, I still caught myself checking the mail with that same nervous feeling, waiting for bad news that wasn't coming anymore. Melissa started smiling again in small ways. Not the big kind of smile you show for photos, but the kind that happens when she didn't notice me watching. She'd hum while doing dishes or talk about new recipes she wanted to try. It wasn't about the food. It was about being able to plan again, something we hadn't done in a long time. Jake was different too, more focused. He'd been quiet for months, barely talking after everything that happened. But now he started helping neighbors with repairs, volunteering for the local fire safety drive. Maybe it was his way of trying to make sense of things. He even said he was thinking of studying civil engineering, something to do with rebuilding, to make houses safer. I didn't say much about it, but I was proud. The first few times I went downtown after the article, people looked at me differently. Not warm exactly, but not hostile either. Just uncertain. A man at the hardware store nodded to me when I came in. He didn't used to. The cashier at the grocery store asked how my family was doing. The same one who wouldn't meet my eyes a few months back. Small things, but they added up. Like the city was slowly letting me back in. One morning, I drove past the fire station, the same one that had responded to Oak Street that night. I sat in the truck for a while, engine running, trying to decide if I should go in. He didn't smile, but he didn't look angry either. We talked in his office, about the night of the fire, about what the new evidence showed. He said something that stayed with me, that sometimes people get caught in the middle of bad luck and bad systems, and no amount of truth can fix how it feels. Before I left, he shook my hand. It was simple, but it meant more than any statement or apology could have. That evening, I came home and found Melissa sitting on the porch, watching the sunset behind the new houses on our street. Half of them still had construction fences around them, but they were standing, and so were we. She asked if I'd seen the fire station. I said yes. She just nodded, like she already knew I needed that moment to close the door on everything. Later, Jake joined us with 2 folding chairs. We didn't talk about the fire or the lawsuit or even the neighbors. We talked about normal things, gas prices, school schedules, a stray cat that had been hanging around our trash bins. It felt strange how normal felt like a luxury now. A week later, the same reporter who had written the correction piece called again. She was doing a follow-up about community rebuilding. Wanted to interview some of the people who had gone through major losses. At first I said no. I didn't want to reopen old wounds. But Melissa convinced me that maybe it was worth showing that we had moved on, that things didn't end in tragedy for everyone. The interview was short, filmed in our backyard near the rebuilt fence. The camera felt awkward, and my voice sounded unfamiliar when I watched it later. But the piece came out simple, honest. No drama, no blame, just facts and hope. The comment section surprised me. People who had once called me reckless were now leaving messages, like a glad he finally got justice, or this story needed closure. Most of them didn't know me, but their words mattered anyway. It was proof that people could change their minds, even if it took time. By spring, I'd gone back to steady work. A local construction company hired me to manage small repair projects. The owner had followed the news and said he admired how I'd handled it. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't handled anything. Not really. I just kept showing up. At first, every job felt like a test. I double-check every tool, every safety measure. Not because I doubted myself, but because the idea of another accident terrified me. It took months before I could hear the sound of a blowtorch or smell burnt wood without tensing up. But over time, that faded too, slowly like everything else. One Friday afternoon, I was fixing a porch rail for a retired couple when the woman brought out lemonade and asked if I was that good guy from Oak Street. I said yes, and braced myself. She just smiled and said she remembered the story. Said it was good that someone finally told the truth. That was all. But it stuck with me all weekend. That's when I realized something important. That maybe healing wasn't about proving I hadn't done something wrong. Maybe it was about learning to live without carrying the weight of everyone's opinion. By summer, the neighborhood looked almost new. Fresh paint, trimmed lawns, new mailboxes. You wouldn't know what had happened if you hadn't lived through it. But sometimes, when the sun set and the light hit the street just right, I could still see flashes of that night. The glow, the smoke, the shadows of people running. It didn't hurt anymore, but it was there. Like a scar that didn't ache but still reminded you where it came from. One evening, Jake came home with a volunteer application for a community fire awareness program. He asked me to sign as a reference. I read the form, smiled and signed it without hesitation. For the first time in 2 years, the air around our house felt clean again. No smell of smoke, no tension. No smell of smoke, no tension. Just the quiet sound of a family that had found its way back. By the time summer turned to fall, I had started volunteering again, not because someone asked me to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. The city had launched a community fire safety initiative, training residents on prevention, evacuation, and how to handle emergencies before help arrived. At first, I helped set up chairs, pass out flyers, and check equipment. But one day, the coordinator asked if I wanted to talk about what happened on Oak Street. I hesitated. I didn't want to be that guy again, the one whose story everyone whispered about. But then I realized that maybe the story could finally do some good, so I agreed. The first session was in a small recreation hall near downtown. Maybe 20 people showed up. I told them what I remembered about that night. Not the newspaper version, not the gossip, just what actually happened. How small choices had made big differences. How fast things could change when panic hit. And how sometimes doing the right thing didn't mean people would see it that way immediately. Nobody interrupted. Nobody judged. When I finished, a man in the front row raised his hand and said he'd never thought about how fast a house fire could spread through shared walls. Another woman asked what kind of smoke alarms we'd had. Simple questions. But for once, it felt like people were listening to learn, not to accuse. After the session, the coordinator asked me to come back the following week. Then the week after that. Before I knew it, I was helping run the whole series. Word spread slowly. By winter, we had full classes every weekend. Some came because they remembered the fire. Others just wanted to feel prepared. Every time I saw someone taking notes or asking how to protect their family, it made the long nights, the headlines, and the months of fear feel useful somehow, like something good had grown out of all that wreckage. Melissa started coming to some sessions too. She didn't say much during them, just helped set up tables, handed out safety kits. But afterward, she always looked lighter. Like helping others helped her heal too. Jake joined in when he wasn't in school. He'd handle the technical demonstrations, how to use extinguishers, how to check wiring. He had a knack for explaining things clearly. I could tell people respected him. not because of what happened to us, but because of how he carried himself now. Calm, reliable. Sometimes during a break, I'd catch Melissa watching him, quiet and proud. She'd meet my eyes and we wouldn't need to say anything. Life still had its problems. Bills, deadlines, stress, the normal stuff. But after what we'd been through, normal felt like a blessing. The kind of chaos we could handle. Then one evening after a session, the fire chief, the same one who'd spoken to me months earlier, showed up at the hall. He waited until everyone had left, then thanked me for what we were doing. He said the city had noticed fewer emergency calls related to house fires since the program started. He told me they wanted to make the safety course an annual event, and asked if I'd be willing to stay involved as an official community advisor. I said yes before I even thought about it. It wasn't a title or a job. It was a way to keep giving something back. That night, driving home, the streets felt familiar again. Not haunted, not heavy, just streets, the way they used to be. When I parked in front of the house, the porch light was on. Melissa had left the door slightly open for me. Inside, the smell of dinner still lingered, and Jake's laughter drifted from the living room. It wasn't a big moment, but it was everything that mattered. As I stood there, I realized I hadn't thought about the fire itself in weeks. Not the sound, not the smoke, not the faces. It was still part of me, but it wasn't the thing that defined me anymore. That realization felt bigger than any court ruling or apology. Over the next few months, things got busier. The safety program expanded to nearby towns. I drove out to small communities, giving talks in schools, churches, community centers, anywhere people gathered. Sometimes Melissa came, sometimes Jake, sometimes I went alone. Every time I met people who'd been through something, a flood, a storm, a loss, they always said the same thing: how it felt like nobody really understood until you lived it yourself. And I'd tell them that understanding wasn't about the event, but about what you did afterward, about how you rebuilt, about who you became when the noise was gone. By the end of that year, Oak Street looked almost brand new. New houses, new families, new beginnings. But every so often, I'd walk past the empty lot where the old Peterson house used to be, the one where the fire had started. Grass had grown over it now, and kids rode bikes across it after school. Nobody talked about what happened anymore. Maybe that was good. Maybe it meant we'd all finally moved on. I didn't avoid it anymore. Sometimes I'd stop for a moment, look at the sunlight hitting the new fences, and think about how far we'd come. Then I'd keep walking. The truth is, forgiveness doesn't happen overnight, not from others and not from yourself. But one quiet evening, standing in front of that empty lot, I realized something I hadn't before. I didn't need anyone else to forgive me. I already had. It happened almost exactly 2 years after the Oak Street fire. Different place, same kind of night. Warm, quiet, too still. I was driving home from a late community meeting at the fire department. Melissa and Jake were waiting for me. The windows were down, the radio low. I passed through our neighborhood, the same streets I'd helped rebuild, now lined with new lights and new families. Then I saw it in a faint orange glow a few blocks ahead. At first I thought it was someone burning trash or using a backyard grill. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't that kind of light. It was pulsing, growing. By the time I turned onto Willow Lane, I saw the flames reaching the edge of a house roof. Someone was screaming. Without thinking, I pulled over. The front yard was already filled with smoke. A man stood in the driveway, shouting into his phone, probably talking to 911. A woman was crying near the porch, yelling that her son was still inside. I didn't stop to think about what I'd promised myself, that I'd never run toward fire again. I just ran. The door was half open, smoke pouring out. I dropped low, covering my face with my sleeve. The living room was already filling up fast, but I could hear coughing from down the hall. I called out. No answer, just another cough, weaker this time. I followed the sound. The hallway was dark except for the flicker of flames from a room on the left. Inside, a boy, maybe 10 years old, was huddled near a window, frozen. I reached him, pulled my jacket over his face, and told him to stay low. We crawled together back toward the door. The heat behind us felt alive. By the time we reached the front yard, the fire trucks were already turning onto the street. The boy's mother grabbed him and wouldn't let go. The paramedics checked them both. The fire chief, The same one from the Oak Street investigation, recognized me. He came over and nodded once and told me I'd done everything right. I didn't say any. I just stood there watching the flames climb higher while water from the hoses began to fight them back. For a moment, I felt the old panic rising, the noise, the smell, the sight of fire against the night sky. But then I looked at the boy, now sitting safely on the curb between his parents, wrapped in a blanket. He was alive. That was all that mattered. Later, as things calmed down, the chief asked me to give a short statement. He said it was clear the fire had started from faulty wiring, an accident, nothing more. And this time, for once, nobody looked at me like I might be the cause. A few neighbors recognized me, one of them, an older man I'd helped rebuild his fence after the first fire, shook my hand. He said people would be talking about this for a while, but this time it wouldn't be rumors, it would be gratitude. Driving home, I realized my hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. The past hadn't followed me into that fire, it stayed behind where it belonged. Melissa was waiting when I got home. She saw the soot on my shirt, the red around my eyes, and for a second I thought she might panic. But instead, she just hugged me. She didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Jake came downstairs a few minutes later. He listened as I told them what happened, how fast it started, how close it was. He didn't ask why I'd gone in. He already knew. He already knew. That night, I sat on the porch after they went to bed. The air smelled faintly of smoke from miles away, but it didn't bother me anymore. I thought about how far we'd come, from the night when everything burned to now, when fire no longer meant fear. The next morning, the local news ran a short piece about the incident. They mentioned the safety program and how a former Oak Street resident had helped rescue a child from a burning home. No dramatics, no accusations, just facts. I didn't care much about the coverage, but seeing Melissa smile as she read it felt like closing a long, heavy book. That evening, Jake asked if he could start training as a volunteer firefighter once he turned 18. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to feel. Proud, scared, both. But I said yes, because maybe that's how cycles heal, not by avoiding the things that hurt us, but by learning to face them differently. The story about the fire on Willow Lane spread through the town faster than I expected. By morning, my phone was full of messages, some from people I hadn't heard from in years. A few apologized for things they'd said after the Oak Street fire. Most just said they were glad the kid was alive. The local newspaper called, asking for a short interview. At first, I said no. I'd had enough of being the subject of stories written by people who didn't live them. But the editor insisted it wasn't about sensationalism. They wanted to write about second chances, about how people could rebuild their lives after disaster. So I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown, the same one that used to have my photo on the Do Not Serve board back when the trial was still fresh. The reporter was young, nervous, probably her first big assignment. She asked careful questions, not pushing too far. I told her what I'd tell anyone now, that I didn't see myself as a hero, just someone who refused to watch another tragedy unfold from a distance. When the article came out, the headline was simple: from accused to rescuer, the man who wouldn't turn away. I didn't expect much. But it went further than I thought, shared on local pages, even picked up by a regional station. For the first time in years, my name was spoken without a pause afterward. Neighbors started waving again. The grocery clerk stopped pretending not to see me. The hardware store owner gave me a small discount for community service. It wasn't about the money. It was about feeling like part of a town again. Not forced, not cautious, just normal. Normal felt like a luxury. Jake told me one afternoon that his friends at school had seen the story online. They said it was cool what I'd done. A year ago, those same kids whispered about me in hallways. Emma was too young to understand everything that had happened back then, but even she sensed it. She started drawing pictures of fire trucks and lemon trees. A few weeks later, the town council invited me to a small ceremony. They were dedicating a new community safety program, partly inspired by the Willow Lane fire. But Melissa squeezed my hand and said maybe it was time to stop running from the story and start owning it. So I went. The event was small, maybe 40 people in the town hall gym. Families, volunteers, local reporters. When I stood up to speak, The same old nervousness crept in. That familiar feeling that someone in the back was waiting to call me a liar. But nobody did. I talked about the importance of knowing what to do in an emergency. About how fear makes people freeze and how small actions, checking alarms, knowing exits, helping each other, could save lives. I didn't mention Oak Street by name, but everyone knew. Afterward, a man came up to me, gray hair, quiet eye. He said he'd lost his brother in a fire years ago, and for a long time he'd blamed himself. He told me hearing my story made him feel like maybe it was okay to stop carrying that guilt. That was the first time I realized how many people live with invisible fires. She was right. I started to enjoy small things again. Fixing a squeaky door, mowing the lawn, sitting on the porch after dinner while the cicadas hummed. Life became quiet again, but not empty. One weekend, we took a family trip to the coast. It was the first time we'd left town together since the trial. Watching Emma build sandcastles and Jake toss stones into the waves, I thought about how close we'd come to losing all this. Melissa sat beside me, her hair moving with the wind, her hand resting lightly on mine. There was no need for words. The silence between us finally meant peace, not distance. When we drove back home that evening, the sun was low, painting the sky in soft orange, and for the first time in years, Oak Street didn't feel like a place of ghosts. It felt like home. A year after the fire on Willow Lane, I was sitting on my porch again, same chair, same quiet street. The sky looked clearer than I remembered. Maybe it was just me finally noticing. Life had settled into something I hadn't felt in a long time. Balance. Melissa was teaching part-time again. Jake had started volunteering with the local fire department. He said it wasn't about following my path. He just wanted to understand what courage really meant. And Emma, she kept watering the lemon tree even when it didn't need it. She said trees grew better when someone believed in them. Work had picked up. People called me not because they pitied me, but because they trusted me. I fixed fences, painted houses, replaced drywall. All the simple things that keep life standing. Some days I'd walk past the rebuilt house on Oak Street. The new owners had kids. They'd hung a red bicycle by the porch, just like the old days. It didn't hurt to see it anymore. It felt right that life had moved on. The town looked better now. New lights, new sidewalks, but more than that, it looked alive again. The fire had changed everyone. Not just me. People waved more. They talked to their neighbors again. They checked on each other during storms. Disaster had taught us something no speech or policy could, that none of us are as alone as we think. Every once in a while, someone still mentions my name when they tell the story of that night. But it's different now. I'm not the man accused. I'm the man who stayed. Sometimes late at night, I still hear echoes of that fire. The crackle, the sirens, the weight of smoke in the lungs. But it doesn't scare me anymore. It reminds me that doing the right thing doesn't always mean being understood. Sometimes it just means you do it anyway, because someone has to. A few months ago, the town council put up a small plaque near the rebuilt block. It read, "To those who run toward the fire." No names, no dates, just that. And somehow that was enough. When I look at it, I don't think about loss or anger anymore. I think about the people who came back. The laughter that returned to our street, the lemon tree in the yard that somehow survived everything. Burned leaves, cracked soil, salt in the air, and still keeps growing. That's what remains after the smoke. Not the ashes, not the blame, just the life that keeps going. As the sun set over the rooftops that night, I realized I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The story was done. The weight was gone, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain, clean, light, new. Melissa stepped out onto the porch, holding 2 cups of coffee. We sat together, saying nothing. We didn't have to. Everything that mattered was still here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out our other stories about real people and real emotions.